Whispers on Steel, Book 1 of the Railway Inheritance, written by Melody Gilly. Chapter 2. Sonya stood at her bedroom window in the Fields' home, watching raindrops race down the glass while Uncle Gregory's letter lay open on the nightstand behind her. The familiar New Jersey landscape blurred through the watery veil, seeming as foreign as the Yorkshire countryside she'd never seen. 3 weeks since the funeral, and her mother's absence still felt like a physical wound, a hollow space carved beneath her ribs where certainty once lived. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes against the reflection that looked back at her. Helena's eyes, Helena's cheekbones, Helena's mouth. But what of the other half? The shadow that had shaped the rest of her face, her height, the way her hands moved when she spoke. The cipher that completed her genetic code. For 25 years, the question had lurked beneath every introduction, every doctor's appointment, every school form with its empty box marked father's name. Helena had deflected with practiced grace. It was just us, darling, until Sonya learned not to ask. The absence became normalized, a blank space she'd trained herself not to notice, like learning to ignore a missing tooth by never letting your tongue explore the gap. She moved to her dresser mirror, studying her reflection more critically now. The shape of her jaw, not Helena's softer contours. The slight arch of her eyebrows. From whom? The way she stood with her weight on her right foot, a habit learned or inherited. She was half a person, constructed from half a history. Her identity built around a silhouette cut from her mother's careful omissions. "You are enough," Helena had always insisted, as though anticipating Sonya's unspoken fear that she was somehow incomplete, a half-empty vessel missing essential elements that could never be recovered. But the hollowness persisted. At college parties, when friends drunkenly traded stories of their parents' foibles, at family gatherings with the Fields where everyone shared the same mannerisms and expressions, in quiet moments, browsing bookshops when she'd instinctively reach for titles about psychology, identity, loss, always circling the same unspoken void. Sonya retrieved the journal from her bed, fingers tracing the worn leather binding that had survived decades and an ocean crossing. Inside, between entries about railway schedules and the English countryside, hints of him appeared in cryptic references. Jay helped arrange the files today. Jay believes the shipment should arrive by Thursday. Jay insists Sebastian suspects nothing. This mysterious Jay, this shadow whose initial appeared like a hook on the page, pulling at threads Sonya had long ago stopped tugging. She glanced at Gregory's letter again. What was hidden must now be found. Was it just the railway operations he meant? The wartime secrets? Or did he know about the other half of her heritage, the missing pieces that would complete the puzzle of her existence? The rain intensified, drumming against the window like impatient fingers. England lay across an ocean, Yorkshire's moors and railway lines as foreign to her as the moon. Yet something pulled at her, a recognition that the incomplete map of her identity might finally be filled in. The blank territories named and claimed. "I've managed this long," she whispered to her reflection, a half-hearted attempt to convince herself that the status quo was sufficient. She'd built a life around the absence, a career at Harrison and Sons, friends and routines that anchored her to New York like roots seeking water where they could find it. Did she need to uproot everything for answers that might only bring more questions? But the hollowness answered back, the echo in her chest that resonated whenever she caught herself wondering if her laugh, her temper, and her love of thunderstorms came from him. She was tired of being partial, of constructing herself around an absence, of the strange feeling of homesickness for a place and person she'd never known. She picked up Gregory's letter, the weight of decision settling over her like a mantle. To stay meant accepting the incompleteness, living with the half-shadows and maybes. To go meant risking everything she thought she knew about herself, about Helena, about the carefully constructed narrative of their life together. "You always said I was enough," she murmured to her mother's memory. "But you also taught me to seek truth, no matter how uncomfortable." She folded the letter, the decision crystallizing like ice forming on a pond. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Harrison and Sons books, turning dust motes into floating gold. Sonya balanced on the library ladder, reorganizing the poetry section according to Mrs. Harrison's latest organizational whim, alphabetically by the author's first name rather than last. Readers connect with Christian names. The older woman had insisted that morning. It's more personal. The bell above the door chimed, and Sonya glanced down to see a familiar figure navigating the narrow aisles. Michael Jenkins carried a brown paper bag in one hand and what looked like a newspaper clipping in the other. His tie was slightly askew, as always, no matter how many times he straightened it throughout the day. "I brought lunch," he announced, holding up the bag. "Mrs. Goldstein's pastrami sandwiches." And he produced a small paper cup of coffee from his coat pocket with the flourish of a magician, the good stuff from Martinelli's, not that dishwater they serve at the diner. Sonya climbed down, brushing dust from her skirt. My hero. "Mrs. Harrison has me rearranging the entire store before the weekend." They settled in the small alcove by the biography section, their usual lunch spot for the past several years. Michael had been delivering lunch at least twice a week since they were 16, when he'd started working as a messenger for his uncle's law firm 6 blocks away. "How's your mother's apartment coming along?" he asked, unwrapping his sandwich. The question was careful, gentle, almost packed. "The Fields are letting me store most of it in their attic until I..." She hesitated, the future suddenly seeming vast and uncertain. "Until you decide whether England is temporary or permanent," Michael finished for her, nodding. He had always been able to complete her thoughts, a product of growing up in neighboring brownstones, sharing homework and secrets, and the peculiar bond of being raised by single mothers. Michael's father had been lost at Normandy, while Sonya's had never been more than a name unspoken. It had created a kinship between them that went beyond ordinary friendship, though lately she'd noticed something shifting in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. "I found this," he said, sliding the newspaper clipping across the small table. "Article about Cambridge University accepting more women in their library sciences program. Thought it might be useful. You know, if you decide to stay there." Sonya studied the clipping, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You really think I should go, don't you?" Michael focused intently on rearranging his pickle spear. "I think you've spent your whole life wondering about the other half of who you are. Your mother never talked about England, never explained why she left. If I had the chance to understand my father better, I'd take a boat across the ocean tomorrow. But what if I find something I don't want to know?" The question had been haunting her since the letter arrived. "Then you'll come home, and we'll go to Coney Island and ride the cyclone until you forget whatever it was." His smile was crooked, familiar. "Or you'll stay and build something new. Either way, you'll finally know." From the front of the store, Mrs. Harrison called for assistance with a customer. Sonya stood reluctantly. "Oh, almost forgot." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "For your journey. It's not much, but..." Inside was a slender volume of Robert Frost poems, well worn but carefully preserved. "Your favorite," she whispered, recognizing the book he'd carried through their high school years. "Thought you might want something familiar on the ship, something that's not complicated." Their fingers brushed as she took the book, and for a moment something unspoken hung in the air between them. Then Mrs. Harrison called again, more insistently. "Will you see me off at the harbor?" Sonya asked, tucking the book into her pocket. "Wouldn't miss it." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Someone has to make sure you get on that boat instead of hiding in the biography section forever." As he left, pausing to straighten his tie in the reflection of the front window, Sonya wondered if England would hold anything as comfortable as these. Quiet lunches, or anyone who knew her as completely as Michael Jenkins, who had never quite found the courage to turn their friendship into something more. Dawn painted the Fields' house in shades of pearl and gold as Sonya closed her small leather suitcase. She'd packed light, a few dresses, her mother's journal, and a handful of photographs. The rest of her belongings would be shipped later, once she was settled in Yorkshire. Sarah Fields stood in the doorway, trying to mask her concern with cheerfulness. "I've packed you some sandwiches for the journey. Ham and cheese, your mother's favorite." Her voice caught slightly. She used to say English ham never quite measured up to American. Jenny clung to Sonia's skirts, while Bobby solemnly presented her with his prized toy crane. "To remember us by," he declared. "I'll send it back once I'm settled," Sonya promised. But the boy shook his head. "Keep it. Dad says we're building toward the future now. Maybe they need cranes in England too." The Fields family drove her to the harbour in Tom's station wagon, the morning sun glinting off the chrome. Neither spoke much during the drive, but as he helped her down from the cab, he pressed an envelope into her hand. "From Sarah and me. Just in case." The White Star Line office was already bustling when she arrived. Her ticket, as promised, was waiting. First-class passage on the SS Queen Mary, leaving that morning. The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly as he handed it over. "Quite a generous uncle you have, Miss Matthews." The Queen Mary loomed against the morning sky, its black hull and white superstructure gleaming in the early light. Dockhands swarmed around it like ants, loading the last luggage, while passengers in their finest clothes crowded the gangways. Sonya clutched her small suitcase, her mother's journal secure in her coat pocket, as she stood at the pier's edge. Her eyes scanned the crowds one last time. The Fields family stood nearby, Sarah dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, Tom checking his watch, Jenny and Bobby solemnly holding the farewell cards they'd made. But there was no sign of the familiar figure she'd been watching for since dawn. Final boarding call for first-class passengers. The steward's voice carried over the harbour noise. "All aboard for Southampton." "He must have gotten held up at work," Sarah offered kindly, noticing Sonia's distraction. "Law messengers can't always choose their schedules." Sonya nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She'd left a note at his apartment yesterday, reminding him of the departure time. They'd made plans to meet by the coffee stand at 7:30, giving them a half hour before she needed to board. Now it was 5 minutes to 8, and the gangway would soon be pulled back. "I should go," she said, giving each of the Fields a final hug. "Thank you for everything. You write to us, you hear." Sarah held her tight. "Let us know what you find over there." Tom awkwardly patted her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you had more courage than sense. Meant it as a compliment, I think." The children presented their cards, construction paper affairs with glitter and crayon illustrations of what they imagined England to look like, castles and double-decker buses, though neither had ever traveled further than New Jersey. Sonya took a final look toward the harbor entrance. No hurrying figure, no familiar crooked smile, just streams of strangers and the impatient blast of the ship's horn. As she climbed the gangway, she tried to focus on what lay ahead rather than what she was leaving behind. Uncle Gregory's letter in her purse, the journal pressed against her heart, the ticket that promised answers to questions she'd carried her entire life. The deck was crowded with passengers waving to loved ones below. Sonya found a spot at the railing, watching as the distance between ship and shore slowly widened. The Fields waved frantically, Jenny hoisted on her father's shoulders for a better view. Sonya waved back, her smile brave despite the hollow feeling in her chest. It was only as the ship cleared the harbor, New York's skyline shrinking behind them, that she spotted him. A distant figure running along the pier's edge, waving something over his head, a book, perhaps, or a letter. Too late, already too far to make out his face, just the familiar outline and the gesture of something held aloft like a flag of surrender. She kept waving long after he'd vanished from sight, unsure if he could still see her. The poetry book he'd given her seemed heavier in her pocket, a small piece of home carried into the unknown. As the shoreline faded into the horizon, Sonya turned her face toward the open sea, toward England, toward the secrets that awaited. In her pocket, her fingers found a folded note tucked into the frost poetry book that she hadn't noticed before. Michael's familiar handwriting offered one last connection. "Find your answers, then come home and tell me everything. I'll be waiting. M." The ship's horn sounded again as they entered open water, its deep bellow both an ending and a beginning. 5 days later, England's shores emerged from the morning mist. Liverpool's docks were a maze of cargo cranes and railway lines, the air thick with coal smoke and sea spray. Sonya caught a train to Yorkshire, watching the industrial landscape gradually give way to rolling hills and ancient stone walls. Uncle Gregory was waiting at the Yorkshire station platform, a tall figure in a well-cut tweed suit. His resemblance to her mother was striking, the same high cheekbones and watchful grey eyes. He embraced her warmly, though something in his manner suggested calculated restraint. "My dear girl," he said, helping her into his Jaguar sedan. "You look so much like Helena did at your age." Though perhaps a bit more serious, the car wound through narrow country lanes and hedgerows heavy with late summer roses. Gregory spoke of her mother's childhood, of picnics on the moors and Christmas parties at the great houses. But there were gaps in his stories, careful omissions that Sonya noted but didn't question. Helena was always climbing trees and exploring where she shouldn't. He chuckled. "Nearly gave your grandmother a heart attack when she found her walking along the railway tracks collecting wildflowers. Your mother said she could feel the trains coming through her shoes, said each engine had its rhythm, its own song." He paused, something darker flickering across his face. That's what made her so valuable to the railway office later. She could tell just by the vibrations if a train was carrying its reported load. "What do you mean?" Sonya asked. Gregory seemed to catch himself. "Oh, just old railway talk. Your mother was very detail-oriented." He steered the conversation to lighter memories. "Did she ever sing you The Night Train to Dresden?" It was her favorite when she was young, though later. He trailed off, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the steering wheel. They passed an abandoned signal box, its windows dark and empty. A rusted sign hung askew. Von Vogel Railway Company, private access only. That was her office. Gregory nodded toward the building. She worked the night shift, monitoring the private freight runs. Sebastian von Vogel insisted on having her there personally. His tone was carefully neutral, but something in it made Sonya's skin prickle. She had perfect pitch, you see, could tell by the sound of the wheels if a train was running heavy or light. Quite useful during the war years when cargo weights became significant. The car turned down a tree-lined drive, revealing Gregory's home, a handsome Victorian cottage built of red brick and Yorkshire stone. Climbing roses framed the arched doorway, and warm light glowed from the leaded windows. It was substantial without being grand, the kind of home that spoke of comfortable means rather than excessive wealth. "The cottage came with my position at the railway police," Gregory explained, helping her from the car. "Though I'm retired now, they let me keep it. Something about services rendered during difficult times." A weathered brass plaque by the door read Station Master's Cottage, though the position hadn't been merely that of a simple station master. "Your mother loved this view," he said, gesturing to where the moors rolled away toward the horizon. In the middle distance, multiple railway lines converged like silver threads in the afternoon light. She used to sit in the garden with her notebook, recording the comings and goings. "Trains tell stories," she'd say, "if you know how to read their signals." He paused at the doorway, his hand on the brass knocker. "The last time I saw her, October 15th, 1942, she was sitting right there on that garden bench, writing in that journal you carry. It was nearly midnight. The Dresden freight was late, and Sebastian von Vogel was becoming agitated." Gregory's eyes grew distant. By morning, she and the night's shipping manifests had vanished. Inside, a cozy sitting room awaited them, with worn leather chairs and walls lined with railway maps. Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper, had indeed prepared tea, the china cups delicate against the sturdy oak table. "Welcome home, Miss Matthews," the older woman said warmly, though her eyes darted briefly to a photograph on the mantel. Helena as a young woman, standing beside a tall, aristocratic man in a railway director's uniform. The frame was turned slightly away from the room, as if someone preferred not to look at it directly. "Come," Gregory said, lifting her suitcase. "I'll show you to your room. It was your mother's once, though you might want to." He hesitated. "Be careful about moving anything in the walls." Helena had her filing system, you might say, for keeping certain records safe. Behind them, a train whistle echoed across the moors. 2 long blasts and a short, just as her mother used to mimic. A signal, Sonya suddenly remembered. That meant danger ahead. The sound seemed to make Gregory stiffen slightly. "Curious," he murmured. That line was supposed to have been closed since 43. Mrs. Thorne had prepared a traditional Yorkshire supper. Roast lamb with mint sauce, buttered peas and roasted potatoes that brought colour to Sonia's travel-worn cheeks. The dining room was intimate, with wainscoted walls and a bay window that looked out over the darkening moors. "You've hardly touched your wine, my dear," Gregory noted, gesturing to her barely sipped glass of claret. "Your mother always said American girls weren't raised on proper European dining habits." She did try, Sonya smiled, thinking of her mother's insistence on afternoon tea, even in their small New York apartment. "Though I prefer books to wine, I'm afraid. I spent most of my free time at Harrison and Sons Books, even before I worked there." Gregory's eyes brightened. "Ah, a literary mind like your mother." Sonya sat up straighter. "I've been thinking about becoming a librarian. There's something about preserving knowledge, organizing information." She traced the rim of her water glass. "The New York Public Library has an amazing rare books collection. I've written a few articles for their newsletter about historical preservation." "A keeper of knowledge," Gregory mused. "How fitting. Cambridge has an excellent library sciences program, you know. Your mother always regretted not attending university herself." He dabbed his mouth with his napkin. Though circumstances intervened, after supper they retired to his den, a cozy room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and filing cabinets. A large desk dominated one corner, its surface covered with maps and old photographs. Gregory pulled a bound collection of newspapers from a drawer, their pages yellow with age. "Before we discuss your academic future," he said, laying the papers on a leather ottoman, "there are some things you should understand about Yorkshire's history, and your own." The first headline caught her breath. "Von Vogel Railway Empire expands south, 1938. Beneath it, a photograph showed a striking man in his 40s, aristocratic features set in a confident smile as he stood before a massive steam engine. "Sebastian von Vogel," Gregory explained, "the last of the great railway barons. His family built the first private lines through Yorkshire in 1885. He turned the page. By 1939, they controlled most of the cargo routes to the continent." Another headline, "Von Vogel Lines secure German trade agreement, 1940. The same man, slightly older, shaking hands with a German official. Something in his eyes had changed. Harder, perhaps, or more haunted. "Your mother worked directly under Sebastian," Gregory continued carefully. "She managed his private correspondence, scheduled his meetings, kept his records." He paused. "All his records." Sonya studied the photographs, noting how Sebastian von Vogel's expression changed through the years. Did she know him well? Gregory's hand hesitated over the next page. Perhaps too well. The von Vogels were more than just railway magnates, Sonya. They were kingmakers and power brokers. Sebastian could charm anyone. Politicians, military officials, young secretaries with sharp minds and sharper intuition. He revealed the next headline, "Tragic Death of Railway Heir, 1943. The photograph showed a demolished train car, smoke rising from twisted metal. The article mentioned a mysterious explosion on the private line to Dresden. "Sebastian von Vogel died that night," Gregory said quietly, "along with whatever secrets he was carrying to Germany. The official investigation was inconclusive." "And Mother?" Sonya asked, her throat tight. "Where was she when this happened?" Gregory closed the newspaper folder with deliberate care. "Safely in New York, thank God. Though she never stopped looking over her shoulder." He stood, walking to a cabinet. "Which reminds me, There's something else you should see. Your mother's files from the railway office. They were misplaced during the investigation. There's more, Gregory said, pulling another bound volume from his desk. The von Vogels weren't just about railways. They were about legacy. He opened to a society page from 1939. Von Vogel heir weds Austrian aristocrat. The photograph showed Sebastian with his bride, Elizabeth von Habsburg, her face radiating a gentle warmth that softened his imperial bearing. Ladies' Aid Society welcomes new railway patroness. Read another headline, showing Elizabeth serving at a soup kitchen. Elizabeth was different from the others. Gregory's voice softened. She saw people, not profits. Even took your mother under her wing when things became complicated at the railway office. Sonya leaned forward. How did they know each other? He showed her another article. Von Vogel Industries expands hospital wing. 1940. Elizabeth stood outside a new medical facility, but it was the background detail that caught Sonya's eye. Her mother, partially visible behind Elizabeth, their heads close in conversation. Elizabeth made your mother her secretary for charitable works, Gregory explained. Kept her away from the railway offices when rumors started circulating about Sebastian's German connections. Some said Elizabeth knew what was coming. She had relatives in Austria who'd seen the changes firsthand. A distant train whistle cut through the night, making them both start. That would be young Sullivan. Gregory's tone changed. Elizabeth's nephew. The last of the von Vogels. He produced a recent newspaper. Von Vogel heir claims ancient railway rights. 1950. The photograph showed a man in his early 20s with his uncle's aristocratic features, but Elizabeth's gentle eyes. Yet something in his expression sent a chill down Sonya's spine. Sullivan's been pushing to reopen the old private lines, Gregory continued. Claims they're his birthright. The railway board's been refusing, citing safety concerns. He pulled out a map showing a network of tracks crossing Yorkshire. These lines go deep into the old mines. Some say Sebastian used them to move more than just coal during the war. The whistle sounded again, closer now. Fascinated, Sonya glanced out the window. Gregory moved to the window. In the distance, a single light moved through the darkness, following the old von Vogel track. Sullivan doesn't acknowledge the closure. Says the right-of-way was granted in perpetuity to his family in 1885. He turned back to Sonya, his face grave. He's been running unauthorized tests at night, trying to prove the tracks are still sound. The board's furious but can't seem to stop him. Old Yorkshire families still remember where their fortunes came from. A new article lay on top of the pile, dated just last week. Von Vogel heir seeks access to wartime records. The piece mentioned Sullivan's request to examine certain sealed documents from 1941. Your mother's files, Gregory said softly. He's looking for your mother's records. He pulled out one final photograph. Sullivan at a recent board meeting. His face turned slightly away from the camera, but his eyes were fixed on something out of frame, with an intensity that spoke of obsession. He believes there's something in those records that could force the board to reopen the lines, Gregory continued. Something about legal ownership, perhaps, or... He hesitated. Other matters. Your mother knew every detail of Sebastian's operations. Every contract, every shipment, every secret meeting. The train whistle echoed again. It sounded like a lonely ghost haunting the moors. But now it carried something else. A hint of warning, or perhaps a challenge. In the distance, wheels screamed against ancient rails, the sound carrying across the night like a promise.